All right, greetings students. Nice to see you today. Here we go. We're going to continue our discussion on the Russians and the Russian Revolution. We talked about Lenin, we talked about Nicholas, we've talked about Russia before World War I, Russia in World War I, Russia dropping out of World War I. Russia continues to move on as now a new nation called the Soviet Union. The most really, obviously Lenin starts it, but really I would say you could make the argument that the most dominant figure of Soviet history is this man right here, Joseph Stalin. Sometimes you'll also see this spelled with just an F, Yosef, or even with an I, the Russians say Iosif. So here we go. He's a very interesting character, one of the great killers of all time, I should also add. So here we go. One of the things I would sort of throw out at you, and I talked about this briefly with the discussion of Lenin, was this discussion in Russia about Marx, of course. Karl Marx said, well, who's going to lead the communist revolution? Well, it's going to be the urban workers, the industrial workers, the proletariat. And of course, Russia's problem, and we'll see this happening in China as well, Russia's problem is that Russia is dominated still by a rural economy. So Lenin was of the mindset, well, the agricultural peasantry is just like the Marxist urban proletariat. And so they really take this into effect, or put this into effect symbolically with the Soviet flag. Okay, this is the Soviet flag. We call it the hammer and the sickle. So what is a hammer? Well, you can see there's a hammer right there. Well, who uses a hammer? Well, somebody who, like I think of a blacksmith, for example. He works with fire, he works in industry. So the hammer represents industry. Now, what does a sickle do? Well, a sickle cuts plants. It cuts down wheat is the best way to think about it. So you can see the handle, and what do? This is the sharp blade area, and so you chop down wheat. So obviously, who uses a sickle? Well, a farmer would do that. And so the combination of the hammer and the sickle, the singular, if you will, star, only one star, one nation, and the red of international communism, you can see that's the Soviet flag. But that's the idea of the hammer and the sickle. All right, so now Stalin, you can see that there's his real name. He's got a very long, real Russian name. He was from an area of what we today would call an area of Russia that is known as Georgia. Yes, it's spelled and actually even pronounced as the same way as the American state, but that was his home area. His full name was Iosif, as I mentioned a moment ago. Iosif Vissarionovich Zhugashvili, I believe is how that's pronounced. And Stalin had a kind of a rough childhood, and there's a lot of discussion with these guys like Hitler and Stalin especially, is that what was it that made them so cruel? What was it that made them so brutal? Well, you look back in their lives. We talked about this with Hitler and the death of his mother and some of the other things that happened to him. Well, I mean, there's no doubt that Stalin came from an abusive household. A cobbler is somebody who makes and repairs shoes. He had a very difficult childhood. Apparently, he had some sort of chicken pox or smallpox as a younger man. And he was left sort of a little bit scarred by that. He was always very self-conscious about that. But he should be mentioned certainly in the revolution time period. The time period as World War I is going on, and the revolution, the Bolshevik revolution led by Lenin, that ultimately topples the republic that had toppled the Tsarist leadership. And remember how Lenin had a pen name? Well, Stalin did too. He had a couple of nicknames, and these were to protect his identity. You can see, obviously, Zhugashvili, we don't really call him that. We think of him as Stalin, which these were his too. His home country of Georgia is sort of in a mountain range called the Caucasus Mountain Range. Well, that's why he was the mountain bandit, and he was the man of steel. And so we should sort of keep in mind two people at this time. One is Stalin, and the other one is a guy named Leon Trotsky. And so these are both guys who are younger than Lenin, and these are both guys who are highly involved as Lenin is moving Russia to the Soviet Union, getting the Bolshevik revolution going. It's really Stalin and Trotsky helping Lenin. And Trotsky and Lenin didn't always get along, but probably in the grand scheme of things, and look, even Stalin and Trotsky sort of knew, even before, they knew they were both young, they were obviously both younger than Lenin, and they knew they would struggle against each other as to who would be next. Probably Lenin preferred Trotsky, and I will explain why here right now. And that is because Trotsky was the more idealistic Marxist, is the best way to put that. Trotsky was very much in specific Marxist theory, this whole idea of a worldwide communist revolution. Yes, we converted Russia to a communist nation. Let's now move to the next nation, and let's continue this worldwide revolution. Let's bring more and more nations under the blanket of communism. Of course, what did Marx say? Workers of the world unite. Trotsky was very much a believer of that. He had this very Marxist, very idealistic thought process. And so one of the other things I would sort of say, we should talk about Trotsky that is very important, is that under Lenin, Trotsky was sort of in charge of Bolshevik military operations. And so what will grow is once the Soviet Union starts is the famous Red Army. Arguably one of the great militaries of all time. Certainly this humongous, massive military. It's really Trotsky we sort of point to, who is the military arm under Lenin. The result is the Red Army. Stalin is different in the sense that Stalin was more, dare I say, a nationalistic type communist. He wanted to satisfy Russians first, is what he claimed. He looked inward. Was Stalin a Marxist? Sure, absolutely. But Stalin was more of a nationalist. He would probably call himself a patriotic Russian. He believed in, look, whether he believed it fully or not, his argument was that we cannot go worldwide until we prove communism will work in Russia first. Now, that could be just sort of him saying, hey, I'm going to solidify my power and become a national leader because that's what I really want. That could be it. But he argued we're going to start this thing called a workers' paradise in Russia. And eventually Stalin wins the power struggle between the two. We know that Leon Trotsky has to escape the Soviet Union with his life, knowing that Stalin will probably, shall I say, take him out. And let me just say this. I spoke of Trotsky organizing the Red Army. We should note that under Lenin, Stalin was in charge of secret operations and clandestine operations. And so what comes out of that is the secret police force, the famous KGB, what would be the equivalent of the American CIA. The famous KGB of the Soviet Union comes out of this, and then Stalin is sort of, if you will, the founder of that. One of the things that we sort of note about Stalin is that one of his personality traits is he seemed to be extremely paranoid. He thought he thought everybody was out to get him. And so because of that, we should note here one of the significant events of the reign of Stalin, once Stalin gets into control after Lenin dies, is the Great Purges. All right, so now when you purge something, what are you doing? You're eliminating that thing. You're purging one thing of something. All right, so now the Great Purges were the elimination of Stalin's rivals and his political enemies. Obviously, the best example of this is Trotsky. Trotsky escapes with his life. This is in the mid to late 20s where this is going on, and once this starts, the Great Purges really get going in the 1930s, and really it's the use, now the official state operation, the KGB, the secret police. It's the use of the secret police to eliminate enemies. Now, how do you do this? And look, some of these guys by the 1930s who were really heroes of the revolution of 1917, now they started off as heroes, and now they're on the bad list because Stalin wants to get rid of them. He sees them as a threat to his power. So how do you do this? Okay, so you got some guy who you want to eliminate. How do you do it? Well, you send the KGB and you arrest the guy. This is how this worked. And then you would really sort of torture that person until you got a confession from them, whether it was for whatever, whether they did it or not. Somebody will confess to something to stop torture. That's one of the arguments against torture. You can't really get true information because people will confess to things, things they didn't even do, to make you stop torturing them. And then what do? You put people on trial. And you don't just put them on trial in a courthouse, you put them on public trial. We call these show trials, and that's exactly what they did. And of course, what's the number one evidence against the individual? Well, the evidence is the confession. Of course, they're going to be found guilty now because what have they done? They've confessed to the crime. And then what do? We put them to death. Those public death, put people to death publicly, or we imprison them. If you recall, I discussed this as well. We imprison them in gulags. We put them into prison in gulags. Those are the infamous, those of course are the infamous prison camps in Siberia in northern Russia. Okay? What is the importance of Stalin? Well, there's a lot of things that we could go into here. One of which is the Stalinization of society. What does this mean? And we sort of see this with Hitler as well. The Stalinization of society. He made himself the central figure of society. Everything in the society revolved around him, the individual. Again, this is one of the great dictators of all time. And we see this is not something he invented. It's not something Hitler invented. This is things that we see throughout history, from Napoleon to Alexander, etc., etc. And so what does this mean? We create a society creates a cult of personality around the person. The Soviet Union is going to succeed or fail based on Stalin himself. So let me give you a couple of examples here. This even gets into culture, but let me do this one first. Stalin tried to industrialize Russia quickly to catch up with the rest of Europe and the U.S. If you recall back in my original sort of discussion of Russia, one of the things that should be of note is that the Industrial Revolution came to Russia late. And so they were behind, and they knew they were behind. It was obvious they were behind. And so Stalin tried to help Russia get these things, get caught up first. And they started these things called 5-year plans. So make a note of that, 5-year plans. The 5-year plans were these great plans to accomplish some sort of industrial goal. And invariably, the Russian people would succeed, and the 5-year plan would only take 4 years, and then Stalin started a new 5-year plan. And a lot of this was made up. A lot of the goals that supposedly happened really didn't happen. But this was the type of thing to propagandize the strength of the society, the strength of the leader, and the industrial might of the Soviet Union does improve significantly under Stalin and afterwards. The best sort of example, I guess, of this would be the space race after Stalin has passed away. The space race is really an example of how the Soviets really tried to prove that they had caught up. All right? These show trials and purges are actually going to be very devastating to Russia during the Second World War, because many of the people that were purged, if you will, that were thrown out of society, that were eliminated from society, were members of the military. These were old Trotskyites followers who were part of the Red Army. He had high-ranking people in the military put to death, political enemies certainly, and there's going to be a point when we talked about in this class the invasion, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, and how that was really, the Germans had a lot of success, and it took the Soviets a long time to get organized and figure out a way to fight back. A lot of that had to do with, historians argue this goes back to the purges. Okay, so the 5-year plans, the purges, etc. But here we go. This is another aspect of Stalinization. Here's two aspects of it: is that art and culture. Art and culture demands a degree of freedom. So the artist has the opportunity to freely think about what their art should be, what message their art should be conveying. All right, those things were not done anymore. Art and culture were forced to be at the beck and call of the state. The government dictated what art and culture was going to be produced. And certainly in this environment of the show trials and the purges, artists were afraid to do things freely that might have been what do artists always do? They challenge authority, don't they? Did you want to challenge authority in a situation like this? Probably not. And so art and culture really sort of comes to a standstill. The other thing I would sort of say is Stalin was an expert at rewriting history, taking credit for things that he may not have necessarily done. We see this, he did a lot of this, taking credit for things that were done during the revolution period, eliminating some things that Trotsky had done. All right. Here we go. We're coming down here to the end here. I want to talk about numbers. Look, like I said, he's considered one of the great murderers of history, certainly well-deserved. How many of his own people did he put to death? Most estimates by historians say Stalin is responsible for the deaths of, all right, so we sort of, we put Hitler at 11 million killed, 6 million Jews, 5 million other people killed, not including German war dead or military operations. This is the killing of fellow Germans and other people. So Stalin is a greater number than that. Conservative estimates are 20 million killed, 20 million Russians killed during the purges. And a lot of these people are killed after World War II. A lot of Ukrainians are killed during after World War II because the Ukrainians sort of welcomed the Nazis as the Nazis came through first, because the Ukrainians hated the Russians. And then once the Nazis were kicked out, there was retaliation against Ukrainians by the Russians afterwards. So really sort of a rough estimate, 20 million killed. Now, whatever happened to old Leon Trotsky? Well, in 1940, Leon Trotsky was found in Mexico by KGB agents, and he was killed. Apparently, it was in like a coffee shop or a small restaurant, and he was killed in 1940. So he had probably been out of, the Soviet Union by that time for close to 15 years, but Stalin's people were after him the entire time, and they finally caught him. Okay, so let's just sort of do some pictures here to end. This is a picture of Lenin, Stalin, and Trotsky. All right, so you sort of saw some pictures of Lenin before, all right, always with the bald head and sort of that goatee type thing. Well, this is Trotsky on the left and Stalin on the right. Trotsky was very much an academic, intelligentsia. Stalin was not as educated as Lenin and Trotsky, not as well read as Lenin and Trotsky. That's another thing, that even though these two guys, Lenin and Trotsky, for a while were did not like each other. They eventually worked things out. Let me sort of just throw this out at you. Here is a famous example of the attempted changing of history. So this is a photograph of Lenin giving a speech, and what appears to be this gentleman right here, this is Leon Trotsky. Okay, so you have the stage set, and here's Leon Trotsky. Well, in just the next slide, look what happens in the very next slide, if you will. Sure enough, guess what happened? Well, old Leon Trotsky has been removed. Now, it's not the exact same picture, okay, but if you look at them sort of both together, you can see that Lenin's hands are in the same place. He's just sort of moved. It's like I said, one slide over. You can see like this guy's got his back to us, but there he's got his front to us, so he may have just turned. But the fact of the matter is that Trotsky has, these two are very close, but how did this figure totally disappear? Well, you talk about cut, copy, and paste, or I guess really it's just cut in this case. You can see that Trotsky was completely eliminated. This type of thing that Stalin was into. The other sort of famous picture we sort of put together is this is the big three. This is Stalin. This is Stalin, Churchill, Roosevelt's in the middle. This is the big three. This is one of their two meetings that they had, the first of two meetings that they had during World War II, the three great allied nations and their leaders. And you can see that Stalin has arrived in a military uniform. And then if you look at some of the propaganda posters, I think you'll sort of see a theme in here. This one, for example, check out this one right here. See if you see a sort of a theme here. These are propaganda posters of the Soviet era. This one is called Under the Banner of Lenin. We are victorious in the struggle for the October Revolution. Under the banner of Lenin, we achieved the decided success in the struggle for victory of the socialist project. All right, and who is Stalin facing off against? Well, the Pope and industrialists and what appears to be some sort of Jewish person right here, okay, and some sort of other capitalists, bad people. All right, this one, how about this one? This one says, hurrah, the proud falcons of our homeland. And he's got, these are actually female pilots and this great new impressive airplane that has been built, okay? And then how about, let's do a couple more here just for fun. We'll do this one. What does this one say? This one says, hail the great Stalin, the Moscow to Volga Canal is open. So this is an example of one of those 5-year plans. What did they do? They built a big canal that you could get from one of their major cities to the other. And then this last one right here. See if you notice sort of a theme here. You're really starting to really can tell in this one. This one says, under the leadership of the great Stalin, forward to communism. This is 1951. Now, what do you sort of notice here? You notice here, this is this idea that what is the great mass of the communist nation, the great mass of people? Yeah, we got some individuals up here, but generally there's this great mass of people. And then if you look, where is Stalin in relation to the mass of all these people? He's above it. He's larger than life. He's greater than the rest. There's more of him than there's more of him individually than all of these others combined. He's the most important thing. So now this should remind you of some stuff here. Like you look at some of these old Nazi propaganda posters, and sure enough, look at what you see. Same kind of thing. The masses behind the singular individual. Look at all of the brown shirts down here. Okay? The leader of the brown shirts, his image is larger than all the faceless, nameless masses. See those types of things? See how that sort of works? And we'll see that again. We'll see something like this again in a very soon WIDP coming up. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Hope you learned something. Pretty scary. I could make the argument. I think that this is pretty scary. I would just sort of throw out to you that Stalin was very popular in the United States during World War II. Most Americans thought that they looked upon Stalin and the Soviet Union as really the ones taking on the Nazis, and that was really true. and Stalin was very popular. Stalin was very popular in the United States. As a matter of fact, Time magazine. As a matter of fact, this is exactly right. This is it. Time magazine named him Man of the Year twice. Okay, everyone. Till next time. Aloha.